Alright, what's poppin', people? It is finally time for me to do my lovely little video covering the recent council vote, which unfortunately has already invalidated the last video I did regarding the meta because Snorlax is gone, which is kind of sad. Anyhow, as you can see, I had a very interesting vote slate. Yeah, I voted do not ban on everything. I don't know. My thing really with a lot of the Pokemon on the slate and the tier at the point we voted was that we had just gotten drops, and I didn't feel that anything had really been a problem before the shifts. So I didn't think like anything here was gonna be an issue. Okay, well here's the Scavalier. I didn't think these five were an issue. Is that five? That is five. Okay, cool. I can count. And because we had just gotten the drops, right, a Scavalier and Snorlax, part of me just didn't feel that I could in good conscience vote ban on either of these. The tier hadn't really been given any time to actually adapt to these Pokemon. They were just kind of thrown in and were like, oh yes, this one obviously broken. And it's like, I'll get into why I have like a more detailed reasoning as to why I actually voted no ban on Snorlax. But I do feel that taking preemptive action on either of these Pokemon, or just such quick action, is just not ideal. I do think that there are cases in which doing so would be fine. For example, if something on like Pheromose's power level or something had dropped into Inyu somehow, then yeah, that's gonna be broken. But I didn't feel that Snorlax or a Scavalier, for what that's worth, hit that point. And I think what dictated the votes on both a Scavalier, or like the votes on a Scavalier compared to Snorlax, just ended up being that people believed Snorlax was much more obviously an issue compared to Scavalier, which, from having talked with the people that voted no ban, which is literally the other forum mods in Kyo, we felt that at least compared to Snorlax, the Scavalier didn't seem as like blatantly just above everything else. And so we felt that it was a lot more reasonable to give it time. Obviously, I say we when I'm talking about giving a Scavalier more time to give Snorlax. Why did I vote do not ban? So, I did write a post regarding that. This will be mostly a summary of that post here. But my big reason for voting no ban on Snorlax does really just boil down to what I've been talking about, where I feel this Pokemon just dropped. And at least on paper, I can find enough counterplay to Snorlax to where I didn't feel that maybe it was going to be as broken as people were claiming to be. So first of all, I want to just establish something. This is the only Snorlax set. You can slash Heat Crash here. I saw someone even mention Toxic. That sounds like quite possibly the worst last move you could go for. But it still sounds like viable enough because it does pretty much the same stuff you'd want Lariat to do. I just don't love the idea of letting something like Subplot Rotom. But I definitely would rate Darkest, Lariat, and Heat Crash much like above Toxic as a potential last. I say this is the only set. Why do I say that? Because people have been hyping up this lovely set called Choice Band. No, I don't think Choice Band Lax was any good. Or maybe saying it's not any good is a bit unfair, but I didn't think it was very good, especially in comparison to this set. So my issue with Choice Band Snorlax pretty much came down to how every move that you would want to lock yourself into was just so dire. Like, none of them were a particularly good option, because your normal stab, there are plenty of Pokemon that resist or are immune to it in Inyu. It's not hard to run into a Steel type, you know, like Galarifisk and now Escavalier. Both very common Pokemon. Ferroseed, even, it dropped P, but Ferroseed's also just one of the higher rated Pokemon, I think, by most people. And of course, Ghost types, they need no introduction. We've seen Kofagri just still running everywhere. We've seen a lot of Silvally Ghost, I think, in comparison to like last month. It's definitely like stepped up as one of the better Silvally forms. I think Subplot Rotom in specific, but Rotom in general has been getting a little bit better after kind of falling in viability throughout much of September. So you don't really ever get to spam your stab attack. So okay, well I'll predict the normal types to go for Darkest Lariat, and it's like, wow, that's maybe one of the worst moves you could ever lock into. And I mentioned Darkest Lariat over like Crunch just because getting through Kofa at Iron Defenses. Oh, I'll lock in a Heat Crash. Yeah, that just unstabbed fire move does not sound like something I really want to lock into. And like Earthquake's a fine move to lock into. I think in general, Inyu isn't the best suited to take ground moves. The only problem is I feel there's still enough like mid-ground options and Pokemon that just are immune to ground. It just CB Lax felt so difficult to really get much run out of because none of its moves were very great. Just repeatedly spam. It's not something like say Sneasel, which I'll talk about later. Choice Banded Knockoff, there's no drawback to ever using that. Even if you've already removed the item of the switch in, you're still using a stab knockoff. Dark's a very good offensive typing in general. And I think a big issue also with CB Lax just ended up being defensive utility was like so much comparably lower if you ran this set. So I think a big part about why Lax was viewed as ban worthy in general for people was how oppressive it was defensively. But these more offensive sets just end up missing out on so much of that oppressiveness because you're having to switch it into attacks because you do want to make use of at least how bulky it is to get in. But that means that you're compromising its ability to take hits later on. And also, like, you don't take these hits as well as you would like to anymore if you do run more offensive spreads. Additionally, because this thing is so slow, you do need to, if you want to actually ever get the jump on things, you are further having to take out of your bulks. You're having to invest into speed then. I think Choice Band wanted some speed. Also, and I guess this comes down to what stab move you prefer. If you go Double Edge, recoil sucks. You probably could go Body Slam on Choice Band, but I feel like that probably means that Mudsdale is not as trivial of a matchup. I think it probably gives more room for Weezing to try to mess with you. In general, you just wanted the damage from Double Edge, though I would have to calc that to confirm it. And so we come across this set, and I think this was easily the most hyped up set, the most talked about set, because you walled Ninetales, you walled Rabombi, you took Jurikos from Specs Duraludon. I think this was a really good set. It did so much defensively. And Snorlax has at least got a high enough base attack to where you don't need to get even mini boosts up before you're like really doing damage with Body Slam. People felt that this set walled like far too much and found too many opportunities to set up, and also just something to point out, defense investment on this even was super helpful because it lets you take hits from like really strong Pokemon like Sock and Gallade. Like Gallade couldn't Oko you like as reliably if you went defense compared to HP. But I still did feel like banning this early was a little bit of an issue, or a little bit like not ideal. So something I think to keep in mind with Inyu right now is how trending upwards there are a few Pokemon that do beat Curslax fairly well. So for instance, we have Iron Defense Duraludon. I've been hearing that get a lot more praise recently because it doesn't run into the issue so much of having a lot of Pokemon that just switch into you once and say, okay, you don't get to do damage. I feel like Specs choice sets in general for Duraludon do find it a little bit more difficult to consistently have an impact on a game, whereas these more bulkier sets that just want to set up, they have that consistent impact. And Iron Defense Duraludon actually does beat Curse Snorlax, even if it has Darkest Lariat. Duraludon's really bulky, and if you even go like the very cash set of max HP, max special defense, which I did try out, and it is pretty good, I want to remark. I think Duraludon is really cool with that set. Lets you actually take Rabombi Moonblast finally. But that set just boosts up alongside Snorlax, doesn't really care about Darkest Lariat because it still won't do over 50. And it just body presses it twice for the KO. I also think we've seen a lot more bulk up Girder in recent time, and obviously that doesn't care about Snorlax. If Snorlax gets the status on it via... Wow, I'm trying to say be it and V at the same time. Be it via Body Slam Paralysis, or like just Toxicking, you're making Girder more problematic for yourself. Iron Defense Cofagrigus, still a valid Pokemon to consider against Snorlax as well, because they aren't all Darkest Lariat. When I was laddering with Snorlax in the tier, I did see Heat Crash at least once, so other people were considering that. Sword Stance is Scavalier, another Pokemon you have to consider. Even just CB is like a strong wall breaker. But I point out Sword Stance in specific because if Lax isn't Heat Crash, if it's Darkest Lariat or Toxic, you just lose to S-Scav. It Sword Stance up versus you and then just, taps you on your head. And if we want to go just like vary away from setup Pokemon, right? You've got a plethora of trick users like Rotom, Whimsicott, Rabombi. They all draw Snorlax in. Snorlax wants to get these opportunities to set up Curse by switching into these Pokemon, right? Well, these Pokemon, since they just naturally draw it in, can pretty easily find chances to cripple it. I did have this conversation with Luck of the Irish. I think he's a really good player. I respect his opinion a lot. And he was mentioning how he feels that it's not very smart of the Lax player to risk it getting, crippled by Trick if it can function as a win condition. If it has a potential to sweep, then okay, preserve it. And while I don't disagree, I also still have to raise the point of sometimes you might just have to switch in your Snorlax into these Pokemon. Like, it may just be your check to at that point, so I don't think you always have that luxury. You could do your best to scout, and for what it's worth, yes, specs on Rabombi isn't that common anymore compared to heavy duty boots with like U-turn Quiver Dance. Especially with a Scavalier in the meta, I think that set's a lot better because you can capitalize on it just walling the hell out of Rabombi by pivoting into your Fire Blast, Wheezing, your fire type in general. So maybe Snorlax isn't worrying as much about just being crippled via like a trick move as it could be, but I do think that it is an issue for it. We also do have a lot of ghost types that can go Taunt Toxic. Or I say a lot. Jelson can go Taunt Toxic. Wheezing can status Snorlax and taunt it, and like just spam Pain Split if it's like a bulky variant. I think we could even see more Gourgeist small right now if we really wanted to, although that's obviously, reaching really down to the bag at that point. I do say that because like with Alolan Persian pretty out of the meta right now, I think Scarf Gourgeist small could be pretty good. And obviously that, could get a trick offers to the Lax, give it a Scarf, and then this thing's not doing nearly as much. Like, I saw a lot of Pokemon mention, okay, even if Snorlax is tricked, it's still really good defensively. And sure, you still take hits well, but you can't set up anymore. You're not getting lefties recovery, so you're super pressured by hazards, and if you were boots, well then, you're now just super pressured by hazards anyway. You can't really go for rest as much as you'd like to, because if you go for rest and just sit, you can't keep your Snorlax out there anymore. Because you're going to wake up and you're going to go for rest again. So, you're limited so much in what you could do. Hell, I not gonna lie, I did mention that we haven't seen much Alolan Persian. I think you could have justified it at least a little bit more if Snorlax is around. Broken Taunt plus Toxic Pokemon. Fur Coat means it isn't really taking a lot of damage. You have Foul Play to punish it for setting up. I think you could have justified it more. Like, I think the whole point pretty much of what I'm trying to say is this. I believe that just 4 days wasn't enough to let the meta adapt to Snorlax's presence. I feel had we given it more time, the metagame could have adapted around it. Maybe Lax would have ended up being like it was in like GSC, where it's on pretty much, I think it is literally on every team. I don't think you ever make a team without Snorlax, and if you do, it's like a very niche situation. Maybe end up something similar to that. If you want a current gen situation, I guess you'd look at like Clefable and OU, where it's so low drawback to using because of how much it offers. Although even then, Clefable has like 3 different sets. I think Snorlax mostly has just one. A fringe viable set at best is another option, but I don't know. I'm glad we didn't make, in my eyes, the same mistake with a Scavalier in banning it too early. And a Scavalier could end up looking broken as well. I don't know. We need to see how it plays out. but I'm just glad we're giving it another week because I feel like with Snorlax there was an opportunity missed. Maybe we could have justified unbanning Pokemon from the BL. Like, say maybe you could unban Haunter from a new BL just because, Snorlax walls that. Escavalier wall. Escavalier's a wall, but Escavalier's also a check to that because Escavalier's bulky as all hell. Also, you get another trick user to cripple Snorlax, so there's even more going against this thing's presence. Now, that's obviously just me theory modding. I don't know if Haunter would have been any less problematic with Snorlax in the tier, but I feel like it would have opened up more possibilities for what we could have done with our currently banned Pokemon. So that's my take on Snorlax. Now, Sneasel is a Pokemon that I have seen other people also question the banning of. Not as much as when we banned Toxicroak last month, right? Yeah, last month we banned Croak. But still seen it, because, and I mean, again, do not ban. And Eternally. Good guy Eternally also with me. There have been, like, talks from other council members since last month about Sneasel being broken, like, throughout the month. People really thought it was an issue. And I never saw it that way. Like, my thing with Sneasel... So, there are two sets, right? And I think one of them is much better than the other. I think CB is a lot better than Boots, but I have heard people saying Boots is what they thought pushed Sneasel over the edge, so... I think opinions just vary a lot on this Pokemon. But I'm going to talk about CB first. So, this is the trademark set of this Pokemon. In a sense that you put a choice band on a fast Pokemon and you use knockoff a lot, and it is a good Pokemon automatically. Like, there's so little drawback to Sneasel in this regard, because Knock is super strong. And it's just, this gen in specific, we lack a lot of great Knock switch-ins. One, we don't have Incineroar anymore. And that was just a good Sneasel switch-in in general, but we don't have Z moves. Or even Megas, for what that's worth. We had one Mega, but hey, it existed. It was there. Mega Audino was a Sneasel check, I guess. But the removal of Z-moves is particularly impactful because now you don't just have the ability to throw out a Pokemon that doesn't care about taking it out because it won't actually lose an item. Everything's worried about losing its item, especially all the Boots users. And so, knockoff is just more punishing in general, and I think it also opened up these boot sets to being a lot more impactful, because you combined the knock spamming of CB, but removed its biggest issue and what I constantly criticized Sneasel for, which was the hazard weakness, and in general the lack of defensive utility. I found Sneasel to be a lot more underwhelming compared to a lot of other users, because you couldn't really get this mon in very easily. You had to get it in through aggressive play, through pivots, and while that's not necessarily the worst order for a Pokemon, I still think it's a big enough issue to bring up. Hazards, despite the prominence of heavy-duty boots, I still feel hazards play a pretty integral role in NU. Be it T-spikes, be it normal spikes, or even just Stealth Rock, because, Mudsdale is, like, conceivably S-rank, I think. It was very easy to limit Sneasel's ability to come in. And I also feel that, like, Sneasel's speed tier, especially this gen, isn't as, like, relevant, I don't think. Because we've got Whimsicott and Ribombee absolutely tearing it up. Ribombee to a much greater extent, but we got the two fast fairy types. We've got a lot of, Scarf Fighters. We've got a lot of Scarf Gallade, and for some reason, Scarf Sock. God damn it, Joey, stop using Scarf Sock, you're hurting me. Ninjask is around, and for some reason I have to validate Ninjask as a Sneasel check because CB Ice Shard does not KO from full. God fucking help me. Girder's really prominent right now as well. At least more prominent than he used to be. I just feel like Sneasel was a very good Pokemon, but I didn't view the meta as that friendly to it. It didn't get those opportunities to safely just exist and wall break. I mean, I think even we saw it last gen. As the tier got faster, Sneasel suffered. And obviously, part of that also had to do with other factors, like Incineroar becoming the de facto #1 Pokemon, Choice Scarf Passimian becoming the de facto #2. But in general, the tier just got faster, and Sneasel was unable to keep up, partly because of that. And then when you look at this set, okay, so this at least removes the hazard weakness, so this must be great. Well, it adds another issue, and that's that this set's not very strong right off the bat, right? Sneasel 95 isn't bad, and as long as you're removing items with knockoff, it's doing a lot of damage. But I still feel like it suffers from trying to figure out how to compensate for this horrible defensive typing, and how easy it is to switch or force Sneasel out, because the thing people mentioned about Sneasel most with this set being so good is that when Sneasel got a Swords Dance up, very little could actually revenge kill it. Because these fast fairy types would falter to Ice Shard. These fast Scarf Gallade would falter to Ice Shard. Pretty much a lot of the Pokemon you'd want to revenge kill just couldn't take the extra power of Ice Shard now. Well, I raise you a similar question to this set. I don't understand how you safely set this move up, and it like consistently are finding opportunities to set it up. You're not threatening as many things out because you're just weaker. Things can stay in versus you a lot more easily because they aren't worried about your damage output nearly as much. You know, like something like a Duraludon, maybe it doesn't want to take your hit if you're CB, but if you're Boots, Duraludon might be more tempted to just stay in and say, okay, I'm bulky enough. You know, Scavalier, okay, I'm bulky enough. Garbodor, it's bulky enough now. I mean, Garbodor stays in regardless, but shh, it's okay. And I'm even disregarding some other like defensive checks that did exist to Sneasel. There aren't many of them for what that's worth, but like you had Miltank. Poliwrath I also think. So my issue with Poliwrath being used last month was like it literally checks Sneasel and then does a whole bunch of rolls. Like here, Poliwrath's a weird Pokemon because it does a whole lot of things. It just does them all at a really mediocre level. And one of them was checking Sneasel and functioning in general just as a defensive water type. But I do think with the addition of a Scavalier, you could have justified this mon a lot more. As it checks Rapidash, it checks Sneasel, it does check Escavalier as well. You know, somehow Poliwrath was looking maybe viable. It checks Silvally Steel as well. I mean, that's not a tall task, but it still does it. So I think even then you could have had the potential for more Poliwrath running around. And while that does only add one check, that is a like more a counter than a check, and I think that's helpful. But I would still like to reiterate, Sneasel was like at minimum a top 3 Pokemon. And so a ban isn't the most unrealistic thing for me to see. I can't disregard how this thing being super fast, not outsped by that much, just hurts that there were a lot of prominent Pokemon that did it. But at the end of the day, the meta is more than just Ribombee, Whimsicott, and Scarf Gallade. And I guess the Selgor, if you still remember that it's in the tier. But meta is more than just those Pokemon. And so, in general, Sneasel's going to be safely outspeeding and clicking knockoff versus whatever it wants to. I just viewed entry hazards as being extremely detrimental to the overall success of Choice Band, and this Pokemon being very weak pre-boost and struggling in my eyes to find opportunities to boost is being very detrimental to heavy-duty boot sets. But I think that's going to be it. Looking back at this, I'm very surprised to see the amount of like bans for Duraludon. I do see Finch. He turned around. Good on you. Escavalier we went over. I think most of our ban votes, I think most of the do not ban votes mostly come from wanting to just give it a chance. I'm actually really surprised to see Gallade was this close to being banned. It was one of the Pokemon, I think Gallade is the Pokemon that I had been rating as number 1 in the tier prior to the bans and the shifts in general, because I think right now I would have Escavalier as the best. I also want to play with it more, see how it fares. But yeah, 4 ban votes for Gallade is incredibly shocking. I'm not at all surprised about this Ninjask ban vote from Schneider. I remember having seen him claim that he believes Ninjask is what defines the meta, compared to other people saying, oh, it's fairy types, oh, it's Sneasel, etc., etc. This, I actually just can't explain Kyo voting ban on Ribombee. I'd have to ask him on that one. I mean, I think at this point, especially with a Scavalier now around, it is much more questionable. I think what it probably is with the Rabombi vote is that at the end of the day, how hard is it really to chip away at the steel types that handle it? You know, how hard is it to get chip on Ninetales? So I think it's not the most far-fetched thing to want to argue for a ban on. I just don't view Boots or Bombi especially as that much of an issue. And with like Specs being so much worse off right now, I think we are seeing the limitations of what happens when you remove the boosting item off of a Pokemon that relies on an attacking stat of 95 to really try to have any sort of, impact on the game. Anyhow, I think that's going to be it from me. At the end of the day, I am still happy with the direction the tier's going in overall. I mean, am I going to complain about losing a strong wall breaker that I have to, try to consider when building? No. It'll make building easier. I just view that the issue with Sneasel, with dealing with Sneasel, a big thing I always thought with it was it's hard to prep for in building, but when you play against it, it generally didn't feel as hard. So long as you were able to limit its chance to wall break, it felt pretty reasonably placed in the tier. And I at least didn't have issues with it, so maybe that's where I'm coming from. That's good for me though. If you're still at this point in the video, comment below on, let's see, give your thoughts on Ninjask below if you make it to this point in the video. Again, the being on the slate, I have to think about it more. I may be the resident Ninjask hater, however, I'll still acknowledge that it has been, in my eyes, even getting a little bit better as the tier's gone on. And as I've been forced to play against it more in test games. Let's give it for me though. Whether it's, I don't know, afternoon, morning, evening, whatever. Hope you enjoy the rest of your time. And that said, till next time, peace.